There are only a few games in my life that genuinely shifted how I think about gaming. Games that left such an impact on me that it changed how I played all games from then on. Batman Arkham Asylum was one of those games. It didn't just let me play as Batman. It made you think like him. It made you feel like him. The combat, the Predator encounters, the detective work, it was unlike anything I had played before. Now, up to that point, I wasn't the kind of player who played games on the hardest difficulty settings. I loved games because they let me feel like the hero. Wolverine maybe, Spider-Man, or whoever I was embodying at the time. I cared about the story, the characters, the music, and the emotion. Difficulty wasn't really on my radar. Or, more accurately, I ignored it. And if I'm being honest, I avoided going to higher difficulties because I wasn't sure I could overcome the challenges, and so I reasoned it wasn't worth my time. But after playing Batman Arkham Asylum to exhaustion, I had hit a crossroads. Move on or try something I had never done before. And so, one day I made the jump. I switched to hard mode. I remember staring at that screen and wondering how I was supposed to counter anything without the attack indicators. They had been doing far more work than I realized. With indicators on, your brain narrows its focus. You have to watch the guy you're hitting and the guy that's about to hit you. Everything else kind of just becomes background noise until the game tells you the next guy to look out for. Well, at least that's how it felt to me. But once you remove the indicators, everything changes. Suddenly you're not just tracking two enemies, you've got to track all of them. It's not clear who's going to commit to an attack or when. You need to constantly calculate when it's safe to strike, when someone across the room is winding up, where the next guy is, where the guy with the gun is, where you are. You have to read the entire battlefield at once and time every move perfectly to maintain that seamless rhythm that makes you feel like you're Batman. And honestly, I loved it. It felt like my brain was finally firing at the speed it was always meant to. Managing an entire room, anticipating attacks, reading body language, flowing from enemy to enemy. It hit me with an intensity I'd never experienced in a game before, and that moment rewired something in me. After that, I never went back to easy or normal modes in any game. Arkham Asylum put me on a path to chase the hardest difficulty in every game I play, and to this day, if I can, I go straight to hard mode. But the most important thing that I took away from Arkham Asylum is a concept that would shape how I evaluate combat systems for the rest of my life, and that is flow. In my first video, I defined flow as the transitional time period between attack and defense, the gap you feel as you move from one action to the next. The shorter the gap is, the stronger the flow becomes. Arkham Asylum pushed that gap down to nearly zero. On normal mode, I never really understood what flow was because I was just reacting to cues. Once the cues were gone, my brain had to do all the computational work that the game had been doing for me. And all that mental effort, maintaining that pace, was what finally revealed the feeling of flow to me. Now, since then, flow has become one of the defining characteristics of combat for me. In my mind, it's the requirement for any system to reach at least an A rank, and it's the most important aspect for me personally. I want every fight to become a seamless stream of intention and reaction, just like how it felt to experience Arkham Asylum. So that brings us to the game this video is discussing, Rise of the Ronin. It's a unique entry in Team Ninja's library because it captures flow in a way that none of the other games quite have. All Team Ninja games flow, that's part of their identity, but Rise of the Ronin separates itself from the rest of the catalog in a way that immediately stood out to me. You can clearly see the DNA of their past work here, but it's been refined, recontextualized, and pushed forward in a way that feels intentional rather than familiar. Because of that, I'm genuinely excited to talk about what this combat system does differently and why it works. So, let's not waste any more time and just dive straight into this review. As usual, it makes sense for us to start with the basic controls. It might seem unnecessary to go over them, but With Rise of the Ronin, it actually really matters, because the game simplifies the formula more than you might expect. You press X or square to attack, and repeated presses give you the basic combo. You can press forward at any point for an advancing attack, or hold the button down for a charged strike. And that's it. At first, I was honestly disappointed. It felt too simple. I thought that Rise of the Ronin was going to be a downgrade in terms of combat. Now, Stranger of Paradise is also very straightforward and simple this way, but that's because it leans on the right trigger for attacks, and there's multiple directional inputs for variety. Rise of the Ronin only has one directional input, and that's great and all, but if you're going to commit to the face buttons the way that they did with this game, you would expect there'd be more combo routes baked into the controls. But you'll see, as the combat opens up, it becomes clear that the depth for this game isn't missing, it's just coming from somewhere else. Alright, so before we can talk about that, let's talk about Rise of the Ronin stamina system, the key bar. Like Nioh, every attack in Rise of the Ronin consumes ki, and just like Nioh, you recover that ki with a well-timed ki pulse, for this game called a blade flash, but it's functionally the same idea. You have 10 different melee weapons to choose from, 9 regular weapons and the fist, I believe, and each one levels up through use. As your proficiency increases, you gain stat bonuses that make that specific weapon more effective, reinforcing commitment to that weapon rather than constantly swapping. Each weapon also has multiple styles, each with distinct characteristics. You equip those styles in the menu, and the stance your character takes changes depending on which one you're using. Every style comes with 3 preset special attacks called martial arts, with a 4th slot that opens up once you've mastered a style, letting you pull a martial art from a different style that you've already mastered. Martial arts are executed by holding the right button and pressing one of the face buttons. They consume ki and function kind of like a hybrid between a special move from Stranger of Paradise and an active skill from Nioh 2. And this is where Rise of the Ronin does something really interesting. You see, most of your ki expenditure comes from the martial arts, not basic attacks. Martial arts can be chained together, and in my experience, the game kind of flips the traditional combo structure on its head. In most action games, you use basic attacks to build up a combo and then finish with a special move. Here, you almost want to lead with martial arts and use basic attacks as safe connective tissue in between them, something that you can fall back on to reposition, recover, or defend when needed. It's almost backwards compared to what we're used to, and that inversion is a huge part of why the combat flows the way it does. Okay, so naturally, when I played this, and having just played Nioh 2, I was wondering, is it possible for me to pre-switch into stances? Well, let's talk about that. The combat really started to click for me when I started trying to link martial arts, but I hadn't done so with different styles mid-combo, and when I did try that, I immediately ran into a problem. It doesn't work the way you would think it does in Nioh 2, but there is a dedicated method for linking martial arts across styles, and thankfully the developers thought about this. And the solution is something called Violent Gale. It's somewhat comparable to the timing of Flux for Nioh, but it serves a different purpose. After completing a martial art, you hold the right button and flick a direction on the right stick. Your character performs a spinning attack that smoothly transitions into the style assigned to that direction. Violent Gale isn't just a stance change though, it's the glue that connects all of the martial arts together, turning individual styles into one continuous flow rather than isolated movesets. Alright, so one of the most important and completely unexplained tools tied to Violent Gale is the ability to feint it, or this is more commonly known in gaming circles as canceling. You can interrupt Violent Gale and flow directly into the martial art you want to use. So, let's go over briefly how to practice this. Now, I know in Nioh 2 I broke down a combo. We're not going to do that for this video, but I do feel like it's important for me to walk you through how to do this. So, start by picking any weapon. It doesn't really matter. But I recommend something with a longer martial art animation, like the Odachi's vault attack or its basic spin attack assigned to X or square. Those give you a clearer window to learn the timing. As the martial art finishes, hold the right button and switch to another stance using the right stick. Okay, once that feels comfortable, we'll add in a martial art from the style that we just switched to. So think of it like this: martial art, violent gale, martial art. It would probably help to do the same button. So if you're going to do this, do, R1 plus X, R1 plus right stick, R1 plus X. Like, that'll help you get it down the easiest by just doing the same buttons. And then eventually, as you get better, you can mix in the other buttons. But after you have that down, then we can start canceling Violent Gale early into that next martial art. So you want to perform a martial art, initiate the Violent Gale, and then as Violent Gale is happening, input the next martial art before it completes. And that early input is a feint. And you can see you kind of fake out the Violent Gale. Alright, so if you get that down, you're going to run into a problem of running out of ki very fast. So we're going to add another layer to this. Managing ki is absolutely crucial if you want to be successful, because it governs both how long you can stay on offense and how reliably you can defend yourself. You need to get comfortable executing ki pulses before and after Violent Gales to keep your ki supply high enough to sustain a duel from start to finish. But when you do, the fight stops feeling like a scramble for resources and starts feeling like a controlled, deliberate flow. Alright, so let's talk about how to practice this. We're going to do the same exact exercise I just showed you, where you go from martial art, Violent Gale to martial art, and then we're going to do martial art, ki pulse, Violent Gale, martial art, and then we'll do martial art, Violent Gale, ki pulse, martial art. You'll see, like, you want to be able to practice doing this in between that to keep your ki high. Okay, so to begin this exercise, first start doing a martial art and then follow it up with a ki pulse. That's normal practice for you, so that should be pretty easy. But after the ki pulse, just enter the Violent Gale and don't cancel it. So just go martial art, ki pulse, Violent Gale. After you're comfortable adding in that Violent Gale, then you can practice adding in the other martial art from our exercise. So martial art, ki pulse, Violent Gale, martial art, and then just do that or do the opposite of that on the next exercise, or when you feel comfortable, and go martial art, then Violent Gale, then ki pulse, and then when you're comfortable with it, add in the final martial art. It's not too complicated. It just takes a little bit of muscle memory to get used to, but shouldn't be a problem. Alright, so feinting like this is critical to high level play, and it lets you maintain flow, keeping the gap between attack and defense as small as possible while still being adaptable. And we'll dive deeper into why that matters later in the video. For now, here's a little demonstration of doing all these things mid-fight. Alright, so the last thing I want to talk about regarding attack is the special move called Ki Blaze, and it's one of those mechanics that's super flashy, and it reinforces everything that this combat system is about. It's a moment where your resource management, timing, and intention all collide. Using Ki Blaze at the right time lets you stay in the fight longer, keep up pressure, and maintain that flow between offense and defense instead of breaking away to recover, all while adding bonus fire damage. Now, it does not save you from bad decisions, but when used deliberately with all the skills you've already gotten, it really rewards the good ones, and that's why it fits so cleanly into how Rise of the Ronin lets you play. Now, personally, I'm not a huge fan of super moves. I didn't like and I shouldn't say I didn't use the yokai shift a ton in Nioh 2. It's just not my style. I don't like relying on super moves. I generally prefer to, win off of skill and pulling off cool moves. Now, it doesn't mean I'll never use them, but I did use the Ki Blaze probably more than I would other special moves in other games. So I thought this one fit pretty well into the combat system. It just gave you a little more oomph on your already skill, and so I like the way this one was implemented. Okay, let's move on to the range stuff. I mean, like I said, the combat is very simple. It's more about how you're able to link the simplicity together that makes it complex, if that makes any sense. Like, it's simple moves and abilities and inputs that are linked together in complex ways. And so it's actually really good. If you hear any squeaking, that's my dog in the background playing with this toy. Okay, let's move on to range. Rise of the Ronin also features ranged options. Bows, rifles, and this time, instead of hand cannons, pistols. And honestly, ranged combat here feels a little meh, because it's both effective and somehow less important at the same time. The reason is mobility. You can jump, climb, and glide into position so easily that I often found myself using ranged attacks simply because I wanted to, not because I needed to. You know, in Nioh, if a ranged enemy is pelting you from across the map, usually you have to fight your way all the way over to that ranged enemy and so having a gun or some ranged option is a good solution. Ranged weapons really mattered and they solved a big problem in Nioh, but here they honestly just feel more like an option than a requirement. That said, I still use them, especially to thin out ads around fugitives and elite enemies, but I never really felt pressured into it. It was always a choice. Bows are the most versatile of the ranged weapons, offering multiple arrow types like normal, venom, and fire. The handgun, on the other hand, feels designed to work in tandem with melee combat rather than replacing it. It's more of a supplemental tool than a primary damage dealer. I personally didn't use the handgun very much, so I just can't go that deep into it, just know that it's there and it does have a role. Now, part of the reason I didn't use it is because of my own bias. Ever since I got Kukai's armor in Nioh 2, I've kind of been obsessed with this idea of like an Odachi wielding warrior priest or warrior monk, and I carried that fantasy straight into Rise of the Ronin, and pistols just didn't fit my character RP in my head, so I didn't do it. That said, I do want to do a future playthrough leading into a detective or like secret agent, stealth style that uses a bayonet and a saber with the handgun. So if you do enjoy this video, let me know if that's something you'd want to see broken down, how to incorporate handgun into melee, because I really do like it. I like the sword gun combo idea, or sword and magic like with Final Fantasy 16. And so it's definitely on my radar to do that, but for now I just played with the Odachi and I had a lot of fun. Alright, let's talk about defense. Rise of the Ronin gives you 3 primary ways to protect yourself, and the most basic and most universal to almost all games is blocking. Holding the left button causes your character to block incoming attacks, but it isn't free. It does consume ki, and if your ki breaks while blocking, you'll enter an exhausted or crumple state, and you'll likely eat a critical hit. Sometimes you get lucky and they don't, but it's a gamble. So, while it is reliable, it is something you have to manage carefully. Enemies have a wide variety of attack patterns, and in early encounters, blocking is actually a great learning tool. It gives you the space to observe timing, rhythm, and sequencing without immediately committing to the risk. But bosses become very complex. Their movesets become very oppressive, and they go for a long time, and you cannot really rely on blocking alone. Like, you do have to get down this game's parry in order to play it. That's just a fact. But blocking can help you get the parry down. So like, I wouldn't see blocking as a means of protecting yourself. That's a means of learning. Okay, that's just me. I'm sure other people have had success not doing things the way I do, but this is my YouTube channel. Okay, so let's go on to the dodge before we talk about the game's parry. Dodging in Rise of the Ronin is mostly just there. It almost feels like ranged combat to me. Not because it's bad, but because the combat design makes it only so it's semi-effective. You can use it to reposition slightly or avoid maybe an attack or two, but as I mentioned before, the oppressive nature of enemy attack patterns severely limits how reliable it is as a defensive option. Like, don't get me wrong, I use it, but I don't think you can really depend on dodging to be successful, and I think that's intentional. Rise of the Ronin wants you to counterspark. It wants precision timing and commitment. The game in some ways is diametrically opposed to the philosophy of Nioh in this regard. Nioh, dodging is primary. You flow through fights with movement and spatial control, and that's the core of its identity. Rise of the Ronin wants you to duel. Now, conceptually, I prefer that approach. I like the idea of reading an opponent and standing your ground and flowing through their attacks. I just don't love how limited dodging feels as a result. Now that's just my experience with it. Other people may have done really well with dodging, so I can't speak to that. All I know is it didn't work out great for me. Now, let's move on to this game's parry, otherwise known as a counter spark. Like Wo Long, this is a dedicated parry, an actual button press, not a timed guard. And I'll be upfront, I hate face button parries. I just want to tap L1 at the right time. That's always been my preference, but it is what it is. And I learned from Nioh 2 and I just went along with it and adapted. And to be honest, once I did, Counter Spark turned out to be incredibly fun. This is where Rise of the Ronin really comes alive. Counter Spark doesn't just stop an attack, it forces you to flow through the enemy's patterns head on. Enemies have their own martial arts, which are telegraphed by a red aura. Successfully parrying these attacks breaks their stance, opening them up and letting you transition immediately into offense. But you gotta be careful because some enemies don't go down that easily. They'll recover and chain into a second martial art or even a third, which means you have to stay alert for follow-ups instead of assuming the exchange is over. That push and pull, defense into offense, offense back into defense is where the intensity lives. One thing I especially enjoy is taking a hit doesn't mean that you're out of the fight. If you stay calm and keep reading enemy attacks, you can flip that momentum with a perfectly timed counter spark and get back on offense. The heart of this game's enjoyment is the flow counter spark creates. Even though it's not the same as the gang fights in Batman, every duel, big or small, gave me that same sensation of seamless motion, of being completely in sync with the fight. Now yes, all Team Ninja games have great flow, but Rise of the Ronin stands head and shoulders in my opinion above the other entries because of how directly and responsively the combat reacts to your defensive choices. Rise of the Ronin goes one step further with its defensive design by attaching tangible, mechanical consequences to the precision defense, and that is a meaningful distinction compared to most action games. Out of the 4 Team Ninja titles that I've reviewed so far, Rise of the Ronin is the only one that truly rewards you for flowing cleanly through an enemy's offense and perfectly defending their assault. I mean, come on, look at this. You can parry bullets and set your sword on fire. That's why, in some ways, I actually love what Rise of the Ronin does more than even Stranger of Paradise. Here, defense isn't just survival, it's progression, it's momentum. It directly shapes the rhythm of the fight and determines how aggressively you're allowed to play. Okay, so one thing that's important to keep in mind is that counter-sparking isn't just equally effective across all styles. It does actually matter which style you're using. Each stance is tied to a key word or has a characteristic. There's Chi, Ten, and Jin. And together they form like a rock-paper-scissors relationship that directly affects how strong your parries are. In Rise of the Ronin, you can read this instantly from the symbol next to the enemy's life and key bars. Double blue arrows pointing up mean that you have the advantage. 2 white triangles, one pointing up and one pointing down, mean that you're neutral against that enemy, and double red arrows pointing down means that you're at a disadvantage. And you can feel the difference in how impactful a counterspark is in each state. Advantage leads to heavier knockback and better conversions, while disadvantage still works but with less payoff. This adds another layer of depth to the combat, encouraging you to actively switch to the advantageous style if you have it equipped before committing to a parry, rather than just treating it as a one-size-fits-all defensive tool. Now, I've maintained this thesis the entire time. Defense is what makes combat systems great, and Rise of the Ronin understands that on a fundamental level. And while I haven't played it, if you look at the current Game of the Year winner, Expedition 33, only seems to be proving me right, because what that game offers in terms of defense to a turn-based game is not revolutionary because other games have done it, but it's one of the most praised aspects to Expedition 33. And so the more I see games, the more I think that I'm being proven right. Defense is what makes the difference, and the more a game leans into its defense, the better it is. And as far as Rise of the Ronin goes, this is the game I'm meant to play. It's a game that asks me to stand my ground, read intent, and commit to precision instead of escaping. One that rewards patience, timing, and the willingness to meet an enemy head-on. Rise of the Ronin doesn't just accommodate that mindset, it was built around it. and in doing so, it speaks directly to how I engage with combat. When everything clicks, it feels less like playing a game and more like inhabiting a rhythm that I already understood. Because when you truly master it, the transitional space between attack and defense shrinks to the smallest margin reality allows, until action and reaction almost feel indistinguishable, and the fight becomes one continuous living motion.